I'm Bill McDonald of the Charlotte County Libraries and History. And welcome to Ode to Local Writers. And our guest is Ed White, who is very active in the Suncoast Writers Group. Ed, welcome to Ode to Local Authors. And before you came to Florida, where did you live?
I lived in Connecticut, although I've lived in other parts of the country too, but we had a small farm in eastern Connecticut. Came here in 2016.
And how did you get interested in writing?
Well, I've always been interested in reading and imagining and things of that sort, and so in 2015, my wife gave me her old computer, which had Word on it, and so I just started, and one morning woke up early, thought I'd write a little short story. I put it on the table for her when she came downstairs, and I did that for successive 3 days, and finally she said, "Stop it." So that's when I decided to start on a novel. So I have since written 12 novels, thrillers and mysteries, written a lot of short stories, published in many places in different countries. I've written a lot of flash fiction, a few essays, and a short play. So I've been busy.
And what writers have influenced your work as you mentioned mystery writing and
Well, mystery writers, one of the things that I do look for if I go to the library, I look for new writers. Now, I mean, I may not get past the first chapter, but you know, I may pick up a gem too that I've never known before. I used to read a lot of Elmore Leonard,
Sure.
Ed McBain, a few of these others, but I like the police procedural novels. And I've gotten out of the thrillers like Sanford and people like that I just stopped reading those. But as far as the police procedurals and things of that sort, I still like that, yeah.
And you have a very unique title to your book, if you want to share that with...
Yeah, the title is Miss Demeanor, but it's 2 words, M-I-S-S, Demeanor. So it's a little play on the words. And it's written with a pseudonym of Celia J, that's J period, and her surname is never revealed in the book. And so, you know, it may seem unusual for a person like me to be writing about a young girl, but I did have 5 granddaughters that I've watched grow into adulthood. And I think my inspiration first came from reading Laurie R. King's book about Mary Russell, who started with Sherlock Holmes at the age of 14, eventually marrying him at the age of 26 in that fictional series. And also books by Alan Bradley, a Canadian writer, with his Flavia de Luce character. She's an 11-year-old solving crimes in her English village in 1950s England. So it just struck me as something that'd be fun to try, and that's what I did.
And Ed, we'd love to have you read a few excerpts from your book.
Okay, Bill. I'll begin by reading part of the overview on the back cover. There's a new crime fighter in town. She's smart, she's fearless, she's 13 years old. She's inspired by Laurie King's fictional Sherlock Holmes sidekick, Mary Russell, and determined to be the world's greatest detective. Enter the brave world of Celia J as she uses the skills learned at a CSI summer camp to investigate an attempt to defraud her father. Following the tragic loss of her mother, Celia's father enrolls her in classes in summer school to ease her grief and to keep her in a safe environment. Celia excels at the investigative lessons, earning her the respect of Detective Lieutenant Beth. Celia sees Beth as her new heroine and hopefully a suitable companion for her dad. But a devious woman with long blonde hair already has her sights on Celia's father, especially his money. Aided by her accomplice, a scary, tattooed man, the woman proposes a phony investment scheme. When Celia suspects something is wrong and launches her investigation, she is trapped in a dangerous predicament far from home and help. An exciting, character-driven, middle-grade mystery filled with a compelling cast of heroes and villains, a clever plot, crime scene investigative tools, suspense, humor, and a heartwarming backstory. That said, it's best to let Celia tell you the story in her own words in these truncated excerpts. I can't tell you my real name. If I did, then I'd have to, well, let's just say it wouldn't be pleasant for you. I'm a private investigator. I solve crimes in my local community, mostly because I'm not old enough to drive a car. Also, I don't charge a lot of money because I'm not licensed. And I don't carry a gun. But I'm smart and tenacious as a bulldog, and I can keep a secret. Before I tell you about some of the cases I've solved, let me tell you how I became a detective. My mother died 2 months before the end of the school year, which left my dad with crushing grief and a very sad 13-year-old daughter facing an uncertain summer. I felt that I needed to grow up fast and be there for my dad. He decided the best thing for me would be if I were kept out of harm's way. So he, instead of hanging with my friends all day at the mall, he enrolled me in a series of day camps. I resisted at first, but when I saw the list of classes included Forensic 1 and Forensic 2, I was all into that. Last Christmas, Mom gave me a copy of Laurie R. King's book, The Beekeeper's Apprentice, and I saw myself as another young Mary Russell working with Sherlock Holmes. I didn't have a Holmes, but I did have a vivid imagination and felt his spirit guiding me into a life of investigative prowess. I couldn't wait to examine my first dead body. Now, this excerpt comes from Celia's first day at the CSI camp. Our group leader was a man named Bob Marshall. He said he was a former city detective retired on medical disability after being shot by chasing a robbery suspect. I pictured myself running down a dark alley, dodging a hail of bullets, to make an arrest when the gun misfired, and I disarmed the perp and slapped the cuffs on him. One of the kids asked Bob if we could see the bullet wound, and he said, "No, maybe later." Detective Marshall showed a scene on the screen at the front of the room. A man was sprawled on the floor of a living room, face down, obviously dead. Bob addressed the class. "Who can give me a clue?" My hand shot up like a rocket. "Yes, Celia, what's the first thing you noticed?" "He's left-handed, Detective Marshall." "Please, everyone, just call me Bob." "Why'd you say that, Celia?" "Because his watch is on his right arm." I smiled and settled back in my seat. "That's an excellent clue, and based on my experience, that's probably true." "What other clues can be seen?" He was addressing the group, but the rocket hand went up first. "Bob, I think he was probably poisoned." "Okay, Celia, what leads you to that conclusion?" "Because there's no evident blood to indicate he was killed by trauma. Also, there's no apparent bruising or twisted neck. So I don't think he was strangled. If you notice, there is a coffee cup on the table next to the chair where he probably was sitting." I had more to say, but Bob interrupted me and asked, "Is it possible that it was only coffee?" "Possible, but not likely." I hesitated for emphasis, then said, "Notice the contorted fingers and the arched back, the obvious signs of strychnine poisoning." I sat back with a Cheshire cat grin on my face. So on the second day of classes, Celia discovers a new role model. Today we had fingerprinting. I was surprised when Lieutenant Frankel came into our room. She was tall, dark-haired woman, dressed in a light blue business suit, instead of a uniform, and she looked a lot like my mother. I instantly found a new hero. She sat against the front edge of the desk with a clipboard and said, "Hi, guys. I'm Detective Lieutenant Beth Frankel, but everyone, please just call me Beth." She had a beautiful smile. She read our names from the clipboard, and when mine was called, I nearly burst out of my chair. She told us that besides leading the instruction for us today, she would supervise the crime scene investigation competition on Friday. I was determined to show her that I was the best. After class, Celia is sitting on the steps outside the building waiting for her dad to come for her. We get the first hint of a backstory. I didn't hear Beth come up beside me. "Do you have someone to pick you up, Celia?" I jumped at the sound of her voice and gave her my best smile. "My dad's coming any minute. Maybe you can meet him." "I'd love to, Celia, but I have a meeting with the chief, and he is not a happy camper when anyone shows up late." Just then, my dad pulled up at the curb. He had the top down. I called after Beth, "That's my dad. That's his new car. His name is Daniel. People call him Dan." She turned and waved to my dad. It's a start. I dropped my backpack behind the seat and clicked my seatbelt before I said anything. Then it all just came tumbling out. "That's Beth. She's a detective. I think she looks like Mom. She's very nice. I don't think she's married. Dan takes Celia to Chili's for dinner, and they talk about the day, but Dan drops a bombshell. I sucked up some Coke with the 2 straws and started to tell him about Beth when he stopped me. He said, "Celia, I loved your mother very much. And of course I love you." He hesitated and I held my breath. "I've met another woman, Celia, and we're going to be dating. Her name is Karen. You'll like her." I know he was speaking to me, but I couldn't hear anything. It's like my world was muted with a TV remote. I stood up, a little dizzy. Said I had to go to the bathroom. The tears started before I got there. I stayed in there for a few minutes, leaning against the sink, wondering if I'd get sick. "You'll like her," kept echoing through my head. So Celia's confused now, and she's angry about this revelation, and later finds a long blonde hair in the car. She's uncertain about her next steps. I hadn't seen my dad look so happy in a long time. I wonder if I'm doing the right thing by investigating Karen. Part of me doesn't want to find out anything that would hurt Dad. Still, a more significant part of me feels there is something funny about this relationship. Besides, I'm sure he'll be happier with Beth. So Celia begins her investigation. When we got home, I Googled Karen's address. Then I went to Google Earth and zoomed down on her home like a hawk. It wasn't much of a house. Not what I expected from someone who dressed as fancy as she did and drove a Cadillac. A split-cedar fence enclosed the backyard. When I Googled her business address, I got really suspicious. There was nothing there. It was in a bad part of the city and appeared to be only a vacant lot. So Celia surveils the building she assumes is Karen's house. The house behind Karen's was for sale and appeared empty. I parked my bike behind the garage. I stood there listening, and the only thing I heard was the bumping of my heart. This was my first surveillance job, and I was a little anxious. The 6-foot fence top was about a foot over my head. There was an old 5-gallon bucket turned upside down behind the garage, and standing on that, I grabbed the top of the fence and pulled myself as high as I could. Then tried to roll over the top, but it was harder than I thought, and I lost my grip. I fell in a heap, gasping for air. A tiny bit of blood ran down my arm from a cut on my right elbow. My first investigation wound. I crept to the small back porch. Through the window, I saw a kitchen table with 2 wooden chairs. An oversized sweatshirt and a camo ball cap were hooked over a chair top, and 2 beer cans stood on the table. How could Karen live here? Did I make a mistake and surveil the wrong house? I could see into part of the front room. I saw the corner of a sofa with a rip along the top and a TV. I took out my phone to take a picture, and suddenly a man's tattooed arm rose above the sofa and the TV clicked on. My heart flipped into my throat. I slipped off the porch and ran to the fence gate, quietly raised the latch, and pulled. It didn't open. I was trapped. I asked myself what Beth would do. I looked around for something to climb on and saw a metal trash can. I climbed on that with my hands gripping the top of the fence, hoisted myself, and rolled over the top. The can tipped over with a crash. I scrambled to my feet and ran to get my bike. So the tattooed man suspects an incursion, and he meets with Karen to discuss this. So tell me again, you heard the trash can fall over and I figure somebody used it to jump the fence. I heard the crash, but by the time I got out there, whoever it was, it disappeared. Who do you think it was? Karen, I have no idea. It was probably nothing. What about your date with Dan? Do you think you can get him to invest? I think so. I know he's got money, and I think he's vulnerable since his wife died. What troubles me is that brat kid of his. She seems suspicious for some reason. She went to a CSI summer camp, so maybe that's why she's acting funny. Maybe I'm making more out of this than I should, but if she gets in the way, you might have to take care of her. So Celia tells her friend Roberta about the surveillance and exaggerates a tad, one of Celia's minor character flaws. Were you scared? Not really. I looked in the window on the back door into the kitchen. Some guy's hat and sweatshirt were hanging from a chair. And it might have been a gun on the table. I wasn't sure. Wow, was the guy there? Yeah, he was in the living room. A big guy with a lot of tats on both arms. And he had a nasty scar that ran down the side of his face. Which side? I rolled my eyes and said, does it matter? Roberta rolled her eyes and said, I guess not. What else? He was watching TV, and like I said, he was a big guy and had a lot of muscles, too. Okay, what else? I took a picture with my phone. Let me see it. Roberta took the phone, looking closely, and said, I don't see any guy. I took it back. He moved just before I took the picture. I didn't see a gun. I sighed and said, I told you I wasn't sure, and I needed to get out of there. So, you hopped the fence? Well, not quite. The fence was much higher at the end of the house, maybe 10 feet. I stood on a trash can and rolled over the top, landing on my feet on the other side. And it crashed over, and I got out of there as quickly as I could and ran to where I hid my bike. Was there a fence there? Oh, yeah, I forgot. It was about 6 feet high. I grabbed the top and pulled myself over. It was easy. Roberta was squinting at me. How tall are you? 5 feet 1 inch. Why? Just figuring. So Celia and Roberta go to the post office to check the wanted posters. I pointed to the one at the top left and said, that might be the guy. Robbie said, wow. In the picture, he had a beard. When I saw him, he didn't. But I'm sure it was him. He had mean eyes. I read the description. Wanted for bank fraud, embezzlement, robbery. Gerald Marvin, alias Jerry Maxwell, Jerry Morgan, Jerry the Moke. Robbie said, wow, what's a moke? I don't know. I think it means he's very dangerous. So Karen's concerned about Celia's suspicion, and so she and Jerry the Moke plan to kidnap Celia and hold her until Karen gets a check from Dan for the phony investment scam. That's her, Jerry. Turn around. Karen reached in the bag at her feet and took out a large red wig and an oversized pair of dark sunglasses. Jerry made a U-turn at the end of the block and drove up beside Celia. Karen held a picture out the window so Celia could see it and spoke with an exaggerated southern accent. I put the kickstand down and went to the van. I looked at the picture of a beagle that seemed like it had been cut out of a magazine dog food ad. Suddenly I saw in the side mirror part of a tattooed arm, something gray, and then nothing, as a blanket was thrown over my head. Oh, crap, I'm being kidnapped. So this is the only profanity in the book. As I said, Celia is not perfect. I was lifted off the ground with my arms pinned to my side. I was screaming inside a woolen blanket and kicking with my high tops against his legs. I heard the side van door open and I was thrown inside. They wrapped duct tape around the blanket, pinning my arms to my sides. Then they taped my ankles, and I felt like I'd been rolled inside a rug. The southern voice said, hold still, kid. I'm going to cut you all an air hole in the blanket so y'all can breathe. It sounded like Karen's voice. Now I need to think. Screaming wouldn't do any good. The van turned a sharp corner. I rolled and crashed in the side of the van. Oh, this is not good. I squared my body so I was lying across the van. Then it came to a sudden stop, and I crashed into the back of the front seats. It started abruptly again, and I rolled to the back and crashed into the rear doors. This is definitely not good. By the time the van came to its final stop, I felt like I was a tennis ball that had been volleyed back and forth over a net. The sliding door opened, and somebody grabbed me and threw me over a shoulder. I was carried downstairs into a musty, smelly basement. He flipped me off his shoulder with a grunt and laid me on the floor. I heard someone else, probably the woman, come down the stairs. She spoke in her phony southern accent and said, we're going to keep y'all here for a few hours, y'all. Then we're going to let y'all loose like a muskrat from a box of rotten apples. Got it, y'all? I spat some lint out of my mouth and said, yup. All right, y'all, just lay here quiet like a bug in a rug, and we'll be back to let y'all go in a few hours. I heard her walk away, and I said, is that you, Karen? She stopped and said, no, y'all. Then she went back up the stairs. I was in a tight spot. Now all I needed was to get out of here. I screamed as loud as I could, help! I did that for a few minutes, and then my throat was dry, so I decided to use common sense detective methods to escape. Before they duct taped me, I remembered something Flavia Luce did when her sisters tied her up and stuck her in a closet. She steepled her fingers so when they bound her wrists, she relaxed. There was a small space in the bindings. I had angled my elbows out a little so the blanket was not so tight when they were relaxed. I braced my feet against a wall and tried to squirm my way out of the blanket. That didn't work. I squiggled my body around, searched along the wall with my bound feet. I felt a pipe. It came up out of the floor and ran up the wall. There was an object on the pipe with a lever that felt like maybe a valve or something. I hooked my ankles over that and tried pulling the duct tape off. The handle moved and I heard water running onto the floor. It began to wet the blanket. I tried to lift my feet off the valve, but they're caught on something. My legs were suspended off the floor and the water had reached the bottom of my head. If this kept up, the small basement would flood and I would drown. I began screaming for help again. So I'll stop reading there. Just like in the old serial movies that cost a dime each week to see the next episode when I was a kid, I'll leave you in suspense.
And Miss Demeanor, where can our audience get a copy? Through the libraries, online? What would you suggest?
Copies will be going to the library. The History of Books is the publisher. It's HISTRIA, and it's historyofbooks.com/historyofkids/. And that will take you right to the catalog. It was just put in the catalog today. I just got an email from them. It's just put in the catalog today. And then it'll be out shortly at Amazon and all the other major retailers and everything. So the launch date is in August, but there's pre-orders now, going on now.
Great.